All right, so we have looked at just a few, and I do mean a few, of the verses that show us that the Bible does not condone particular actions. And 1 Corinthians 5:11 specifically says that we are not to associate with people who have these actions repeatedly in fellowship. Note, though, it does not say they can't be in the church building. It does not say they can't come in and hear the truth. It says they cannot be members of the church and serve in any function of the church in fellowship. So this then puts us in a position to now begin looking at some of the arguments presented here as we look at first. Probably I think the best spot to start with would be, well, what is love? Because the very first thing that was put in that article, one of the first things was the quote from the Reverend Kishline, who said, "We feel very strongly that God is about diversity, and diversity is part of the character of God. When you look at the earth and all of the living things within it, there's not just one kind of this or one kind of that. Why shouldn't there be a multitude of ways to love?" Okay, well, since that's where she wants to start, let's start there. Let's start specifically in 1 John chapter 4, verses 8 through 12, since it specifically says within that passage that God is love. Okay. "He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us." Now the question that Kishline asks is, why shouldn't there be a multitude of ways to love? Well, there are, according to the Bible. God is a way of love known as agape, and I've always heard it defined as unconditional love, or the highest form of love. Now, opening up Helps and Strong's, I found a more specific definition, which honestly surprised me. It said properly, love which centers in moral preference. In the New Testament, agape refers to divine love, or what God prefers. Yes, God's love is unconditional in that he gives it freely to everyone. It does not, however, mean that he loves everything. Again, it's a love that gives to everyone. Notice he said, while we were yet sinners, Christ still loved us. And it's actually Christ still loves us. It's one of those tenses that gets messed up when they translate it over into English quite a bit, because he didn't stop loving us, but they put it in the past tense to show it's a past action that's continuing. But anyways, but it does not. It's not a love that excuses the things that are immoral. This is why that even though God is love, he has the following description in Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 19. "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren." Yes, God loves us, but he hates some of the things that we do. And the word for hate here is to have animosity toward, or to be against. Again, note, nothing in that list is a person, but rather their actions. Now, I did say there are multiple ways here to love. And as we get further down to verse 10, it says, "Not that we loved God." And the word love there is agapakamon, which means to take pleasure in. A few words later is, "but that he loved us," which is agapesin, meaning wishes well. So we took no pleasure in God, but God still wished us the best and gave his Son for us so that we can get into a better state than the sin that separates us. The passage continues to use wish well onwards to show that the same restoration God wishes for us, we should wish toward everyone else and one another. We don't just love or accept everyone into the membership. Instead, what it says there when it says love, this is one of the problems with the English use of having way too many definitions for the same word. That word there is that we are to wish them the same restoration to fellowship that God wishes for us. That is how we are to love one another according to the Bible. It very, very clearly defines how we are to love one another. Yes, there are other ways to love as well defined in the Bible. How to love your wife, how to love your husband, how to love your parents, how to love your children. It's all there. And if people really want, we could do a series of lessons on that. But as far as among church members, who is supposed to be part of that church in that roster in full fellowship, having positions within that church that are dictated by the Bible, this is our definition of love according to the Bible that we follow. There is not more than one way to love one another within church fellowship and within the church membership. It states very clearly that we are to wish the best and restoration from sin. So let's look at the quote real quick from a pastor that was circulating through social media that I saw, and then we'll get to one more quote before we start wrapping up in the next video. The pastor put this quote out there, and it got circulated around. It appeared on one of my social media streams that I was watching. It says, "Here's how many times Jesus condemns a homosexual. 0. You're welcome." As we see from the previous comment, he's right. Jesus never condemned a homosexual in his earthly ministry. As we saw earlier while going through the Bible, though, the Bible tells us not to allow homosexuality into the church. Again, there are many times that homosexuality is condemned, but there is never a point where the homosexual is condemned. They can come into the church, but they cannot be part of the membership and in fellowship so long as they are still committing that sin repeatedly. And that leaves us with that brings us to the quote that the guy Gregory Gross said. He said, "I am a man who loves another man. If you're going to go after me, let's go after everyone. I believe in the Bible, and it is said, 'Let he who has not sinned cast the first stone.'" Now, this quote is taken from the middle of an event, and it's not even the quote. Let's look at the total passage. It's John chapter 8, verses 3 through 11, because the quote towards her, the quote here is towards those who would judge her, but verse 11 contains something that he says to her about all of this. So starting in verse 3, he says, "And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? This they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. So verse 3 sets up the scene. The Pharisees are bringing a woman before Jesus, saying that she was charged with committing adultery and was caught in the act. They ask Jesus what should be done to her because the law of Moses says they're supposed to stone her and put her to death. So pause here. They've said their reason is the law of the Moses. So looking for this law, it can be found in two places. If they're going to quote the law, we have the law. Let's see what they're saying. Leviticus 20:10 says, And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Okay, so yeah, she ought to die by that one. Deuteronomy 22, verses 22 through 24, if a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, they shall both of them die, both the man that lay with the woman and the woman, so shalt thou put away evil from Israel. If a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto a husband, and a man find her in the city and lie with her, then he shall bring them both out unto the gate of that city, and he shall stone them with stones that they die. The damsel because she cried not, being in the city, and the man because he hath humbled his neighbor's wife, so thou shalt put away evil from among you. So again, she should die. But this is the law they cited as their reason. Neither say, however, that she must be stoned. Notice that. Never says that. It says instead that they are to die. Well, she is to die. The only reason she is to be stoned is if she was a betrothed virgin prior to the adulteration and she didn't cry out for help. That is the only time that she should have been stoned. So just because she committed adultery doesn't necessarily mean you've got to be able to say she was a betrothed virgin prior to the adulteration and that she didn't cry out for help. Because notice in Deuteronomy 22:24, the damsel because she cried not, being in the city. If she cried out for help and was forced, she was not to be stoned or accused of adultery. Now the next thing to note is that in both verses it says if a man be found. This is not the woman, but the man, the adulterer, and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Then ye shall bring them both out. And there is no man standing accused in this scene. The very law that the Pharisees cited was being violated by them. So why try this foolishness? I mean, these are supposed to be the smart people of the time, the people that have been taught and know better. Well, verse 6 tells us why. It says, this they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. If Jesus had stoned her or ordered her to stone, he would have violated their law and have sinned. So that brings us to the verse that was only half read. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Jesus did not say they couldn't cast the first stone. He was saying that the first one who wanted to carry out this false sentencing and be under the law, go right ahead. They would have sinned by doing so, however, and he points this out to them. Let the one who hasn't broken the law in some way be the one who carries out this wrong sentence, because only then would they be worthy to judge someone wrongly, and then, after having judged them wrongly, they wouldn't be worthy anymore. And the word used, therefore, without sin, is actually the word that is unerring. There was an error in their sentence, and Jesus knew it. They knew it, but here he traps them in it. That's why in verse 9, after having told them, the one of you who is unerring in this judgment, let him go ahead. But in verse 9 it says, and they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. They were convicted by their own conscience. The word convicted is to show to be guilty. Their own conscience showed them to be guilty of breaking the very law they accused her of, because they did not bring both the man and the woman. And so Jesus was left alone with her. Well, why didn't Jesus leave? He hadn't erred. He was still perfect, so there was nothing there to convince him to leave. That's why the next two verses are so important. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Jesus saw none still there and asked her if any man had condemned her. And this is important because he isolates himself from man by doing so when he says, Neither do I. And there is a huge important part to the second part of what he tells her, though. He says, go and sin no more, which is slightly off. In the Greek, it would be, go and from now on, sin no more. He did not say she hadn't sinned. He tells her, however, to not continue to sin. So when Gross says, I am a man who loves another man, if you're going to go after me, let's go after everyone. I believe in the Bible. It is said, let he who has not sinned cast the first stone. If you do believe in the Bible, it does say what was said. But it says also to sin no more. You don't just get to keep on committing the sin of homosexuality within the church. Again, though, there is a huge difference between these things. And so since we've looked at love, with the next part, we need to look at what is hate and what do we do in reaction as we wrap all this up.